On this episode of Never Stop Learning, we will be looking into the mystery that is the shipwreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. You may have heard this name before, as it was made famous by Gordon Lightfoot in his song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. But we're going to take a deeper look into the history of the ship and see what exactly could have happened to cause this massive vessel to disappear. Nicknamed Big Fitz. This ship was named for the insurance company CEO that ordered the ship to be built in the first place. Normally ships are built from the bottom up, or keel up, but the Big Fitz was so large that it had to be put together and built in sections, sort of like a giant Lego. It cost $8.4 million to build, and at the time was the most expensive freighter ever made. At a length of 729 feet, it was 1 foot short of the maximum length allowed in the Sault Ste. Marie locks, or Soo locks as they are known. It was also 75 feet across and 39 feet tall. The ship itself was made up of 3 cargo holds with 21 waterproof hatches along the deck. Each hatch was a 7-ton sheet of steel that was held in place by 68 clamps. It had a 19.5-foot propeller, which could get the ship up to 26 kilometers an hour. For a freighter this big, that was incredibly quick. On June 7, 1958, 15,000 people came out to witness the ship being launched into the lake. When Elizabeth Fitzgerald, the wife of Edmund Fitzgerald, attempted to christen the ship by smashing a champagne bottle over the bow, it took her 3 attempts to break it. Upon sideways launch, the ship created a large wave that doused the spectators and then crashed into the pier before righting herself. One man watching the launch had a heart attack and later died. Other witnesses later swore the ship was trying to climb right out of the water. Sailors who are superstitious in nature call this a bad omen, and little did they know how right they were. For the next 17 years, the Big Fitz went to work on the Great Lakes. During its first load, it broke the record for most tonnage carried. It carried iron ore from Duluth, Minnesota to factories in Detroit and Toledo. It normally took 4 to 6 hours to load the ship and up to 14 hours to unload. The trip along the lakes would normally take 5 days to travel, and the Big Fitz would normally do 47 trips in a season. In her lifetime, she did a total of 748 trips. The Big Fitz had 4 captains during her lifespan, starting with Bert Lambert, who captained the ship for just 1 year before retirement. Next was Joe Larson, who commanded the vessel until 1966. This is when Peter Pulser took over. He was an interesting character that was well liked by the crew. He would play music over the loudspeakers on the ship, and when traveling through the locks, he would take out his megaphone and tell onlookers facts about the ship and where it was headed. The final captain of the Big Fitz was Ernest McSorley. He had 40 years of experience on the Great Lakes and was a well-respected but quiet man who planned on retiring after the season in 1975. During its service, the Big Fitz did encounter its fair share of bumps and bruises. In 1969, the ship grounded out in the Soo locks. In 1970, it collided with another vessel, causing minor damage, and over the years, it hit the walls of the Soo locks 3 times. As well, in 1974, a broken link caused it to lose its anchor in the Detroit River. Before we get into the final days of the Big Fitz, make sure to subscribe to see everything else this channel has to offer. On November 9th, 1975, the Big Fitz was scheduled to leave Wisconsin, headed for Detroit with over 26,000 tons of taconite ore pellets aboard. When the ship was loaded, it had to be done carefully. It is very important that the cargo is loaded evenly. If, for example, too much is put in the front or the back of the ship, the weight can cause the ship to sink. As well, if the middle is loaded too quickly, it can snap the ship right in half. There were also trim lights on the stern deckhouse. These lights give the crew details on if the ship is listing. This term is important for later. Listing is when the ship starts to lean to one side or the other because the weight inside isn't evenly distributed. Janice Armagos took her kids to the lake to see if she could see her husband off as the ship was sailing out of port. She asked about her husband, Mike Armagos, but was told that he was below deck. Janice was the last person to see any of the crew members alive. Later in the day, Big Fitz met up with Arthur M. Anderson. This ship was captained by Jesse Cooper and was headed to Gary, Indiana. Since they were both headed in the same direction, they decided to travel together a few miles apart to keep an eye on each other and discuss the harsh weather that was on its way. Two storms, a low-pressure system headed in from the southwestern United States, as well as another headed east from Alberta. November storms are a big deal on the Great Lakes, especially Lake Superior. Wind is a big factor when it comes to waves. The stronger the wind means the bigger the wave. As well, the longer the wind blows means even bigger waves. And finally, the greater the fetch or distance wind can travel over open water means even bigger waves. Lake Superior is hundreds of miles of open water, so waves here can be catastrophic. On November 10th at 1 a.m., the Fitz and Anderson gave a weather update. Winds were traveling at 60 miles per hour and the waves were 10 feet high. There was plenty of spray, but no waves on deck, or green water as it's called. The waves smashing into the Fitz were tough, but the steel used to make it was strong as well as flexible. Unlike older ships where steel didn't flex. An example of this was the Daniel Morel, which was built in the 1920s with older, more brittle steel. In a November storm in 1966, this ship was traveling Lake Superior when waves started hammering the vessel. 4 men loaded into the life rafts as the ship broke apart. There was only 1 survivor out of 29 men. So back to the Fitz. Being built of stronger, more flexible steel allowed the ship to bend and flex without breaking. There were access tunnels below deck that under calm conditions, you could see from one end of the ship to the other, but during storms like this one, with the ship flexing and bending, you weren't able to see the far side. At 1 p.m. on November 10th, the ship had sailed into the eye of the storm, and everything went calm. Both the Fitz and the Anderson were headed for Caribou Island. This was a dangerous spot for ships to travel, as the depth of the ocean floor varies between 600 feet and just 36, which was only 6 feet deeper than the Fitz's bottom. Anderson headed west to avoid the shallow waters, but the Fitz continued onward. Leaving the eye of the storm, the ship started encountering 12-foot waves again. The Coast Guard advised ships in the area to seek shelter. At 3:35 p.m., Captain McSorley reported multiple issues to the Anderson. The Fitz had lost some of its vent covers. The Fitz had 8 ballast tanks below the cargo hold that would hold water when the ship was empty. This was to keep it deeper in the water so that the propeller was submerged. These vents were used to help airflow in when the tanks were emptied. Without these covers on the vents, the waves and water blowing over the deck were pouring into the vent holes, filling the ballasts, causing the ship to sink deeper into the water. The ship had started to list to starboard. If you are looking towards the front of the ship, this means the right side. The captain stated that all pumps were on to empty the ballasts, but the ship was still listing. Another problem they were having was that the fence rail had come down. These rails are made up of steel cables that run the length of the ship. This was sort of a big deal, as the only way these rails can break is if there was a massive shift in the structural integrity of the vessel as a whole. This usually happens when the ship is bottomed out or the frame of the entire ship had been warped. The final issue was that the Fitz's radar had been damaged, so it was sailing blind. McSorley decided to slow this ship so that the Anderson could catch up and guide it. McSorley got on the radio with the first mate of the Anderson, Morgan Clark. Clark told him they were 12 miles from Whitefish Point, where they would be safe from the weather. Winds were 96 kilometers an hour with gusts up to 144. McSorley's final words to Clark were they were holding their own. This was the last message from the Fitz. The Fitz never gave any indication they were in serious trouble or sinking, and no SOS. This may be due to pride. If you say you might be sinking, but you never actually sink, you'd be the laughingstock on the lakes because everyone would have heard you. At 6:30, the Anderson was hit by two rogue waves. One went over the deck, and the second, at a height of 35 feet, hit the bridge of the ship and was headed in the Fitz's direction. As there are no living witnesses to how the ship sank, this is just an educated guess at what happened. Water filling the ballasts, combined with the 26,000 tons of iron ore already aboard, added too much weight, causing the load to shift towards the front or bow of the ship. The bow dipped into the water and blew out the windows of the pilot house. It also hit the bottom, causing a 30-foot gash in the lake floor. But the ship was longer than the water was deep, so the stern was still above the waterline. Hatch covers blew out and the cargo went everywhere. The ship also twisted in the middle and finally snapped in two. The water would have come in contact with the boilers, causing massive explosions. At 7:10, the Fitz sank in Canadian waters down to a depth of 530 feet below the surface. All 29 men aboard lost their lives. No bodies were found, as it was thought that the ship sank so fast that no one could escape. The wreckage of the ship was found 4 days later by an airplane with special detection equipment. Sonar was later done in the area to see that the wreckage was now in two pieces. The two sections of the ship are 170 feet apart, with the bow sitting upright in a crater from hitting the bottom so hard, and the stern or rear of the ship is flipped over and at an entirely different angle from the front. Over the years, there have been many theories on what happened. Since there were no survivors or witnesses, we can only truly guess as to how this could have happened. Thanks for watching this episode of Never Stop Learning. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the episode, and let us know in the comments below what you think happened.